Hello, and welcome to the Crypto Beat. My name is Kelvin Sparks. My co-host Tim Copeland, head of growth at The Block, is out today. Nonetheless, we have Laurence, co-founder of Wildcat Finance, and James Craig, a filmmaker and co-director of Code is Law. Welcome to the show, guys. How are we all doing?
It's open to work out who goes first here, right? But alive on my I really feel like we should have lined that one up for one after the other. I think this is about as good as it's going to get. We're all doing fine.
Yeah, doing excellent. I'm really happy to be here.
Nice. Now, on to today's podcast about the film Code is Law. So, just to start, background, James, you started the film with some potent words when interviewing Griff Green. So now I think it's important to ask you both, like, when was the first time Bitcoin hijacked your brain to the point you couldn't think about anything else?
Yeah, I can talk about that because I'm not really, that was actually one of the bits of the film that people really liked. I saw, so yeah, when Griff talks about his brain getting hijacked and then dumping his girlfriend because he just wanted to think about crypto all the time. And I when I first started doing this, I didn't really know anything about crypto at all. So we were just looking for the subject to make a kind of indie film about. And then my co-director, Louis Giles, who's not here, he'd gone to ETHCC, I think it was 2023, because he did know a little bit about crypto. So he'd done some branded stuff for Aave. And so he was talking to Michael Bentley, who is the CEO of Ogle. And it was just after they'd had this massive hack happen. So it was like $200 million they lost. And then, so he told Louis about this and Louis came and spoke to me about it. And then we both kind of looked into it. And it was just like, so I didn't know anything about crypto or DeFi or anything. It was just this bonkers story where this 19-year-old kid and he'd figured out a way to exploit them, take $200 million. And then there were all these crazy twists and turns. Like he'd sent some of the money to North Korea to try and kind of put them off the scent. And then a load of white hats were together chasing him, and then eventually they kind of found out who he was, and then he panicked and gave the money. It ended up giving the whole lot of the money back. And I was just like blown away by this crazy world and all these dynamics that I wouldn't have imagined could possibly exist. And also the fact that nobody in the kind of world outside crypto, like nobody was even aware this kind of stuff is happening. I was like, well, that's okay. So $200 million are getting stolen and nobody is even aware of it. And there are, Michael Bentley's from near, lives near me. He's, it's a UK company. So yeah, I was just like started going down the rabbit hole at that point and trying to figure out like how this is possible, how these hacks are happening. And that was really, it's like since then, that was 2 years ago, and then 2.5 years ago, and I haven't tried to do anything else apart from films about crypto since then.
Mine was a lot more prosaic in that I was doing my postgrad, and I was just like, students are out of the office out of holiday times, and we're like spending our time doing other bits and pieces instead, like, building like a floppy disk orchestra or whatever. And I wanted to build a Tesla coil, and I was told no. So I built a Bitcoin miner instead. It's literally as simple as that. Mined a bunch of it, immediately lost the wallet. You're all welcome. And then completely forgot about crypto for several years until the Ethereum yellow paper came out and got hijacked by that instead, while I was working in a bank, which is not quite the same as, kind of getting one-shotted by the story of 9 figures going missing, but like far more prosaic and just like, oh, I'd rather do this than work at a bank.
Yeah, fair game. And thank you for your pro rata contribution to the Bitcoin network, sir.
Well, that's all right. Sailors sending it all to hell in a matter of hours. So you were welcome. It was really great doing magical internet money with all of you that are watching.
So I guess moving on, since you mentioned Ethereum, Laurence, I guess Christoph Jentsch, so I know I butchered his name, but the creator of the DAO, spoke about like the DAO fundraise at DevCon 1. So I'm curious, Laurence, what role does DevCon/DevConnect play in bootstrapping new ideas in crypto?
I think DevCon, DevConnect, ECC, Denver, all of these, this is, we talk about how like this one in particular in Buenos Aires that we're all about to head to is Ethereum World's Fair. But, to an extent, they all are. We all travel the world doing this. And I think their benefit is, we all spend our time shouting at each other on Twitter. But I think there's something to be said for actually getting a chance to sit down and bash ideas out. I think, 1 or 2 drinks in. I think I have a slightly cynical view where I think a lot of the major mechanisms that we're going to be using in crypto have already been invented. Although everyone always surprises me on this front. But I think there is something to be said for actually meeting the right person at the right time. And the best chance for that to happen is at an event like DevCon or DevConnect. I don't think I'd be brave enough to arrange a fundraise while I was there, but I think it was a much headier time at like DevCon 1 because it was also new and exciting, right? Like no one, like everyone was like, well, let's just see if this sticks, which is admittedly how I think a lot of products get made now. For everyone who wants to create the 400th perp dex, I'm sure that this one will be the one where you meet your co-founder, but it's useful on that front, like as like a social leveraging tool, because and then you can meet up and like do the work of like actually speccing stuff out later.
Well said. And now I'm curious for the both of you, like what's the most surprising difference you noticed across like early cryptocurrency adopters, whether it's in mingling in the community or even in just making the film in your case, James?
Yeah, I can kind of speak to that, but because first actually the idea for the film was to do it purely about DeFi hacks. So after we'd spoken to Laurence and the team at Indexed, and we also spoken a bit to Ogle. We were initially going to do that, and then it was only kind of a few months into the process that I came across. I think it was first I came across Laura Shin's work on the DAO, and then started learning about the DAO. And that's when I kind of got in touch with all those guys and met all the team there. And it was definitely like very, very, very stark the difference between those two groups of people. In that, with the DAO people, and especially Griff, who's the one I got to know the best, is just like they were real idealists. Like as soon as I got talking to them, they weren't talking in terms of money at all. Really, what they were talking about was I remember Griff in like the first conversation I had with him was like, oh yeah, the DAO. It was in my head. It was like DAOs were going to be to. He said like DAOs were going to be to governments what governments were to monarchies. He was like that's like why he was interested in the technology. For him, it was like a kind of this grand experiment in changing the way the society functions. And that was like, I mean, I know there's still that kind of talk around, but amongst the kind of crowd of the DeFi people that I was speaking to before and afterwards, much less so. I think like those initial, and it kind of touched on what you say about DevCon 1. Like you can see when I was going back and watching those videos of Christoph pitching the idea, there's definitely like that feeling in the air of like real idealism and real kind of dreaminess of the people that are interested in the tech at that stage, which was actually really cool to see. It's one of the things that really got me interested.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think because I came at it technically right, that I mean, I'm class of 2017 and Ethereum, which is not as old as it gets. There are people that are slightly older than me in that sense. So you got like, I mean, Left Harris was there for the launch, etc. He's a dear friend. But I think like one of the things that would mark you out as like one of the early guys is like your more technical knowledge about like how actually, for example, the execution layer or consensus layer of Ethereum works, actually like caring about what goes into like the various hard forks. I realize that marks you out as being kind of like a more in it for the tech type. And of course, as a developer, there's things that I want to see in there. There's things I don't. So, like I have violent disagreements about things. But I think I also am very aware that I'm a boomer when it comes to Ethereum by comparison to like the things that I consider valuable. And I've moved now, like I've Peter principled myself into a team lead for a protocol. But I still like care quite deeply about that. And you would see this on like the Bitcoin Talk forums as well. Like people would be arguing about like the best way to like run or optimize a node or a miner or anything of the sort, which is not what pulls in people now. I think, there was like a long phase where it was, the greatest and worst image that Bitcoin ever created was the, magic internet money, join us. The inspiration for the Taproot wizard. And I think like if I grab people that are sitting from like that 2015, 2018 era, I can sit down and do technical chats, and I prefer doing that. But also a bunch of us get incredibly jaded. And I think like this loops into, the point of Coder's law. I think especially like with the recent balancer attack, there are people who have been around for donkey's years who are now sitting there being like, all right, man, like, what are we doing here at this point? There's people who like, your grand idealists who are sitting there going, okay, we've just been co-opted by TradFi now. Like, I think the malaise can set in a lot quicker for the idealists rather than just like, for different reasons than, oh, my portfolio is down 50% because I had everything in PopCat.
I guess to that point, I mean, you guys both spoke about idealism, emotionalism, heated arguments. I mean, so early on, crypto, I guess, even to this day, is almost viewed as this, at least Bitcoin, Ethereum, are like these almost neo-religious types of communities. So as we kind of move into talking about the hack, James, who are the most emotional people that you saw when making the film? Like when actually recollecting to that moment, they're like, oh, wow, 30% of this race has just been drained.
Yeah, I was gonna interrupt before he starts by saying I think I'm the only one that cried during filming.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't without wishing to embarrass Laurence at all. There was a clear right. There was a first of all, the first thing to say is that everybody I spoke to who was running a project or a protocol who had suffered a big hack, everybody finds it like there is definitely trauma with anybody who's been through that situation where it's tens, hundreds of millions of dollars that are suddenly disappearing, and they have the feeling that there are thousands and thousands of people who are going to lose money and they're going to be angry with them. And there's definitely like a firestorm of emotions that people go through. The DAO people, it was a bit different because I think they are because that was such a massive story. They had told their stories quite a few times. They were used to being asked about this stuff, and I think like it's clear that it was emotional. I mean, we say in the movie there's a story that Griff tells about when Christoph Jentsch was physically sick when they raised $100 million because he was so panicked by the idea that they had so much money at stake. And yeah, like they definitely, when they tell the story, it wasn't an emotional time for them. I think it was definitely a heavily emotional time. But it was different with Laurence and with Daniel Luca as well, who was the security researcher who audited the index code, or one of the security researchers who audited the index code before it went live. Those were very heated interviews. They were still like, I mean, that was only sort of 2 years hence from the attack between 2 and 3 years of the attack taking place. And there is still a lot of emotion, and that's partially because it was a more recent attack, but it's also because with that attack, because the attacker is known and he's still out there. And literally, actually, on the day we filmed with Daniel Luca in December 2023. It was just about 48 hours before that KyberSwap had been hacked. So he'd been traveling and he didn't even know that had happened. So we like sat him down in front of a laptop and I was like, here, like look at the news. Like here's, have you heard about this hack? And he was like, okay, yeah, 48 million. Da, da, da. And then I was like, now look at the code. Like, look at the smart contract code used for this attack. Who does it seem like to you? And he looked it through and he was like very, very, very shaken, realizing looking at this code that it was the same, very likely to have been the same attacker as it attacked Index. And it was like, it was an intense, like, emotional thing to do. So, like, from the perspective of a filmmaker, it was a brilliant thing to be involved in because it was a very human reaction to something that is, like, actually, a difficult story to tell in lots of ways because it's grounded in a lot of complex cultural, technological ideas. But yeah, it was certainly emotional, a lot of the filming. And yeah, I know Laurence felt the same thing while he was telling his story.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in the film. Another thing, I believe it was you were speaking with Fabian, and he spoke about just 2 lines of code made a world of difference in all that transpired and how it impacted crypto history. So while I was watching the film, I kind of thought, since I get a chance to talk to you and Laurence as an OG and as the filmmaker, like, what's the one thing that scares you most about like money being a data type on the internet?
I'll jump in here. I think the really commonly reused line that I like keep hitting back over and over again is I was working in banking and I was programming for money, and like the thing that got me into Ethereum is that I wanted to learn to program money itself. And as you said, like the line flip there in the DAO is what introduced like the first re-entrancy attack. I mean, it's old history by now. Like 6-year-olds know it. At least my 6-year-olds will know it. It's terrifying. I think I've mentioned this in the film as well, to kind of like jump a bit, where I said, like, the worm enters your mind about like, oh, this is a lot of money. And it is, in any like reasonable sense. Like, I can't speak to like anyone that's outside of this like industry and be like, oh yeah, like I was involved with something where $16 million was taken, and we know who it is, but like nothing can be done about it for now. Like that's just like an objectively crazy thing to say. I think I was about to get a little bit philosophical and be like, well, what is money? Like, is Ethereum money? Is it the USDC stuff? Like, you start seeing guardrails on like freezing stuff. It's scary. It's also incredibly liberating, like kind of philosophically. It doesn't feel great feeling the weight of that, like, knowing that something can go wrong, even if you know that like no one would blame you in the event of something going wrong. It's still terrifying. I mean, like, I will mention here, for example, Wildcat has now been live for 2 years in 2 different iterations, and is carrying 9 figures worth of credit that's been like actively like still being like issued out. It's secured on chain through like there are some like pretty heavy mechanisms in place to handle that, but it doesn't stop me from still laying awake at night, being like, when is like the next thing happening? Because I've lived it before, and like that doesn't leave you. And I think there is a point where over time, you get this kind of feeling of, okay, well, it's been several years. I have a feeling this is battle tested in Lindy, because like in Wildcat's case, like at least because of what we did to Majedovic, we know that we have like the most motivated person in the world to attack Wildcat and embarrass me, right? But then again, 2 weeks ago, Balancer V2, which is code that like Index was based on, some of the lindiest code that exists in the Ethereum ecosystem, taken for $120 million. And like, that's terrifying. It doesn't go away. Like, I think a lot of people, including Lefteris, who spoke about this publicly, said, if that's not safe, what is? So I think it kind of goes beyond just like two lines being flipped. It's like, okay, it turns out that we can't actually like even use time as like a metric of safety, which is a real black pill that a bunch of us have had to swallow over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's fair. But then does that mean like crypto itself as an industry, or even we'll say DeFi developers or crypto developers in general, fear their own success? It's the idea is you want to, or at least I feel like a lot of young people my generation came into crypto because this is how I'm going to make it. It's the future of finance. But at the same time, you have that looming fear keeping you up at night. I mean, it's kind of paradoxical in a sense.
Yeah, you get a lot of like your OG folk and, kind of more TradFi folk who will sit there and say like, for example, the risk premiums, like, like the APYs or whatever are not necessarily worth it because everyone like talks about it in the abstract when they talk about like, they just refer to smart contract risk is like how it's kind of like abstractly packaged away as something to be aware of. I think the phrase smart contract risk means something different to an end user than it does to a developer that wrote the code. Because for one, it's my money's gone. The other one is I was like indirectly or directly responsible for like this genuinely life changing catastrophe for like several like people involved. And I guess this is what you're also asking about, like the early idealism of like I guess people like myself. Although I don't like calling myself an OG, I'm not. I wasn't there at like the genesis of it all, compared to people like yourself. You were like, this is like the WAGMI, this is how you hyper gamble your way into the elite before you're 25, DGen Spartan reference there. It's difficult to kind of like reconcile. I don't think crypto fears its own success. I think crypto success is inevitable. I have to believe that, or else I couldn't get out of bed every morning. I think it's perhaps going to look different to what the original cypherpunks envisaged it as rather becoming the backbone of like the TradFi system that we sought to replace. Rather, we've been co-opted quite adroitly by institutional premises. I think developers fear their own success, or at least I think they should, because it's a huge burden. I didn't write a lot of the code for Wildcat V2, but I still feel very personally responsible for it because the buck has to stop somewhere, right? Although when I say the buck stops somewhere, I don't necessarily mean in a legal liability sense. I certainly do feel as though, like, in terms of perhaps feeling responsible, that has to be somewhere.
Understood. And I guess, James, from your perspective, more like crypto adjacent and in a non-technical sense, how does that, what Laurence said, resonate with you?
Yeah, I think it chimes with me a lot in the sense that is what I've spoken now to, I would say, a couple of dozen founders or developers who have kind of worked at projects that have suffered significant hacks, and it doesn't matter whether they're significantly insured for the users not to lose money, or they have enough money in their treasury that users don't lose money, or it's only it's a small enough hack that it doesn't end the project. I think everybody who goes through it is like I alluded to before. Everybody who goes through it suffers a degree of trauma from it. I think there's a dynamic which plays on people's minds going on there, where often because the hacker, they never know who the hacker is or what the circumstances were exactly and how the hacker discovered the vulnerability in the code and things like that. And so there's a lot of questions. I think people can become very obsessive about that, of trying to figure out what happened. And also because of the level of weight that, Laurence mentions there that, the users won't necessarily blame the founders and the developers for for what happens, and that I've seen that a lot as well. I mean, we talk about that a lot in the film. That there's this amazing line from Christoph Jentsch which blew me away when I was talking the interview, where he said, that they'd lost $50 million of people's money, but they didn't get a lawyer, and nobody was suing them, and nobody, they weren't being blamed by the people that had lost money. And I found that incredible to see, but I think it doesn't change the fact that the developers and founders often feel a massive weight of responsibility, even if they're not being directly blamed. They certainly are very fearful of the money being lost. And I've seen the kind of human side of that a lot when I've been doing the research for this film.
Well said. And I'm kind of curious to piggyback off the point you just made. When you talk about the Robin Hood war group that was formed to kind of say, okay, in light of whatever liability we feel as developers, we need to do something rather than just sitting here idly and kind of just see whatever happens. How do you think that inspired the future of maybe white hat, gray hat, black hat hackers?
I can talk about this because this was really, again, this is one of the things I remember having sat and watched. Laura Shin had done an interview with 4 of the key kind of stakeholders like Griff Greed and Leif Deris and Christoph Jentsch. And they spoke about this Robin Hood effort, the kind of counter hack, and then loads of copycat attackers attacking stuff. And it just blew my mind, the kind of drama of that situation. And then it was really, this was one of the really interesting things to learn about, actually, was the kind of lineage of the white hats. Because the Robin Hood group that we tell the story of in the film, who was kind of composed of people who were stakeholders in the DAO, either people who were involved in the team or members, like Fabian Vogelsteller, who you mentioned before. They carried on to, I think there was the parity hack, which happened at there were 2 big parity incidents the following year, but the multi-sig exploit that happened about a year later, where I think they rescued something like $200 million worth of user funds from about 500 vulnerable wallets. So they did another really, really, really big counter hack. And they carried on work. I think they, over the kind of 2 years after that, they were involved in several incidents. And then you can see this kind of direct passing down of the torch between, from people like Leif Deris, who were then getting called into war rooms years afterwards, like Index War Room, and we talk about that in the film. And then you can kind of see that and then sharing spaces on hacks where there's other white hats, people like Ogle that we have in the film, and then CZ Sun, who lots of people will know. And then, so who's now kind of taking that on an extra level because he's formalized the process by starting up the Security Alliance, and there's now a much more kind of almost official kind of feeling route that people can go down to try and protect themselves when hacks happen. The white hats have now got a proper an alliance, the Security Alliance, that people can turn to when these incidents happen. So yeah, it's really interesting seeing how that cultural aspect of crypto, of the white hats kind of battling against the hackers, has now become so much more, because I guess it's just so necessary in a space where it's still, law enforcement are still struggling so much to try and catch up with the reality of the situation. I lose track of the number of times I speak to people, whether it's individuals that have been hacked or projects that have been hacked, where they just talk about hitting a complete brick wall with law enforcement. So you can see how important that kind of passing of the torch has been for the space.
There was a post that Zach XBT made a couple of days ago where he said, here are the top 5 countries that are absolutely useless in terms of responding to law enforcement requests. And number 4 was the UK. And I remember that being the case even several years ago. I think the best that we had in terms of reporting something was ring a cybercrime action response line, and no one picked up. And I can't imagine it's gotten any better since.
Wow. That's pretty wild. I mean, even in the film, they allude to the fact that, somebody broke into the deli or corner store and they stole $500, and that makes news. Meanwhile, in crypto, millions go missing in a matter of minutes or hours, days, whatever it may be. And everybody just keeps chugging along. It's actually quite wild to think about.
The only time I've ever heard a crypto hack actually make it onto the news, I was in the car. I was listening to BBC Radio 1. So UK people will appreciate that, and absolutely no one else will. And it was about a day or 2 after the Ronin hack. And that was notable because that hit half a yard. That was 600 million. And that was apparently the number that warranted a 15-second blurb in the headlines today. And it was basically to 600 million GG, get wrecked. That was effectively it.
Yeah, I mean, you threw out some terms there, so I kind of wanted to jump ahead since we started throwing out the internet slang a bit. We kind of spoke about or throughout the film, it was a common motif, how code is law unintentionally inspired the new generation, or did it? How is the term code is law, if it did, inspire this new generation of the Wild West and creating these new kinds of cops and robbers?
I mean, I don't think it did. I mean, the phrase "code is law" has existed for decades now. It like the phrase, how it was originally phrased by Laurence was a very different sense, like the way that we use it in crypto, right? That was more kind of like, oh, we create. This was like, around the time of the birth of the internet. Was, this is how we create our structure, how like websites interact with each other, and this is how we interface with each other. We use it as a, do what thou wilt. Consequences be damned. I think probably the greatest validation for code is law still being alive and well. And I think I fall on this one actually being the right call, was the SDNY and Pereira Bueno case that just got thrown out, the 25 million sandwich bot attack. Well, attack. I don't even think attack is the right word to use. Where
The MEV
that was
brothers
thrown
case,
out. The MEV brothers case. I should have just said that. It turns out that's what I get for actually knowing the case. But that was judged a mistrial because the jury were just like, "What the hell is this?" So it's clearly complicated, right? And I think like we can talk about like other large cases that have been thrown out kind of on like not weird, but like kind of like technical premises as well. But I don't know if code is law itself inspired kind of a lackadaisical kind of like approach of like, GG get wrecked. I think that was always there. Like that's kind of part of the, that meme of like the two girls fighting and there's the dude who's smoking out of a bong, like watching on the side. I think that's quite a fundamental part of just the internet. As I said, like I used to play League until my eldest was born. I was absolutely the guy who would type GG easy after the worst game of my entire life. Like I know what it's like to be a toxic asshole on the internet. I still can be that guy, and I think it's very. I've written about this on Mirror like a couple of years ago, where whenever there's a hack, like community can split into two ways, and one of them is people immediately rushing to help, rushing to identify, rushing to basically like moral support, and then the other one who was just like, yeah, get him. Like lionizing the attacker or whatever. I think it just depends on like whether you're looking for entertainment or looking to help. And that's just us. That's humans. That's who we are.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that last part about how I think there's something about the fact that in this kind of with smart contract technology, especially with the kind of digital frontier that creates, where if somebody understands the code very well and is able to manipulate it, then that gives them a tremendous amount of power. That dynamic is very, very, very attractive to people with a certain mindset, because there is just this idea of this kind of like omnipotent, very powerful person who's able to create, move huge amounts of money and hold huge, control the whole dynamic. And I think that just appeals to a certain kind of person on the internet that is really driven towards that kind of character. And this is why we see again and again and again, and especially in the cases where the hacker's identity comes out. I think Andean is the most pertinent kind of, that people are just drawn to that kind of character. It's just a psychological thing. I think you see it all over the world. I think people that are built like that and are attracted to that kind of dynamic attract a lot of attention.
And I think I can allow myself a little bit of hypocrisy here, because if we're talking about this kind of code is law, if you have something, you have power. Like some of like my cypherpunk kind of like tech idols from like the 80s are people like Kevin Mitnick or like Slipstream Cowboy. These folk who are like actively tinkering around with like NASA stuff, or like kind of pioneers of phreaking on payphones. And because there was like if you knew that kind of skill or had to do that, like that was, to be blunt, insanely based. And so like I realize it's weird for me to sit here, and I think it's probably just because of the proximity and and maybe like some of the technical knowledge that like, oh, I think that was based, but this is offensive. Like I'm in two minds like half the time about most of this stuff. It could be the case that when we get to the 2060s, where God willing, magic internet money is no longer a thing, and we've all got jobs in the fields, we'll look back on some of these attackers and be like, okay, will we class them in the same kind of sense? I don't know yet. I don't have the benefit of foresight.
Understood. So then I guess one thing I'm curious about is we talk about broader internet culture. You think about like just the common jokes that people make on CT and the internet at large, like skill issue, GGs, getting wrecked, getting owned. Like what role does internet culture play in the future of finance? Because obviously this kind of permissionless like money in the or money like assets, things like Ethereum are out there. Anybody can utilize and play around with them. Like people are probably just going to make jokes on anything they could find. So like curious how you guys view that.
I think that's always been the case, right? I worked on a banking desk for ages in middle office. Like internet culture is human culture, right? And one of the things that I think is like quite important to remember is that like, ultimately this is all pegged down by like layer zero, the social layer, us. And it's our nature to like joke when things are tough or like traumatic or like as a way to cope. It's also human nature to just kind of enjoy good bit of Schadenfreude. Just be like, haha, yeah, this sucks for other people, not me. I don't necessarily think that's internet culture. I certainly think that internet culture makes us worse. A bunch of us have been trapped in our magic boxes for several years, and other people are just pixels, which is not great for your empathy. I think it's very easy to kind of like detract yourself from that, to be like, oh, there are actually real people who like need to feed their families or like do their jobs here. And instead, like, I'm just going to make like a shitty joke about it. I'm victim to this. I have been on the receiving side of this, and I have occasionally gotten the boot in. So like, I get to stand on no moral high ground here.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the perspective I have on it is different because I think when I remember when the Kyber swap hack had happened, and we were, because obviously there was a massive amount of money that had gone missing. It was nearly $50 million had gone missing. And then there were these crazy on-chain interactions where the hacker was kind of, I guess, toying with the team behind Kyber swap and kind of clearly absolutely reveling in the attention. And from an onlooker who was not kind of familiar with a lot of this culture, or was only sort of starting to get to grips with it, it was mind-blowing to me that anybody would be, after they'd done something so serious, obviously have such potentially serious consequences for them, was taking the risk of kind of being out there, making jokes about it, like reveling in the attention. And I think that's indicative of a certain kind of like psychological trait that's linked to this kind of internet culture. It creates behaviors that are seemingly completely irrational, very dangerous, but they're like Laurence says, there's a disconnect between, a clear disconnect between the reality of the action, the severity of the actions, the number of people that are affected by it, and the kind of the fact that somebody could just enjoy it and revel in the attention as it's happening. And I think, yeah, that's one of the things about the Andean case that's just been like completely mind blowing to me.
Understood. And I guess as we talk about this, the quirks in human nature, one of the I mean, he's not a character, but it's CT personality, a person, Ogle, who's in the film. Like, what was your like read on him, and were there any interesting quirks that you saw when discussing with him? Because he has an odd job, if you don't mind telling the folks about what he does.
Yeah, sure. So, I've become good friends with him over the course of time. I've known him now, and so he describes himself as a white hat recovery expert in the film. I got to know him because, like I said, I'd done some looked at the Wildcat Finance hack quite a lot, and he was one of the people that was kind of in a war room together, trying to come up with strategies to get the attacker to return the funds in that case. And he is definitely a interesting. Like, I think before I met him, I wondered how much like he would, for example, like he would talk about he didn't want to show his face on the screen. He was very he doesn't show his face online. And I was curious as to how much of that was kind of performative and how much of it was kind of born out of a real fear. I really didn't know before I met him. But I remember actually the very first thing that happened was that we, because when you're, I hope that people that own the Airbnb don't listen to this, but we rented an Airbnb to do this interview. We traveled to the States to do it. It was when the conference was in Denver, and to be able to control the lighting, so we'd like blacked out all the windows with black bin bags, and then we'd covered all the floor with plastic sheets so that the camera equipment wasn't damaging the floor, and so it was all like ready to go for filming. And then when he turned up at the door, I remember like he'd come out the taxi, and then I opened the door to him, and I remember the look on his face because he saw like the black bin bags all over the windows and the plastic on the floor, and I was like, oh, like he thinks we're about to kidnap him and torture him. Like that's the look on his face said to me, like he thinks this whole documentary has just been a ploy, and that we're some hacker somewhere that's about to get him back. Like I really saw the panic, so I had to say like really quickly, like, don't worry about any of this. And so, like, I could see then, like, okay, like it's legit that he is really like, you know, on the front line of some of these situations where there could be like dangerous people on the other end of it. But yeah, I just remember that moment as being one of the kind of high points of the process for me, and like it was quite farcical, but at the same time, it like gave me a little kind of hint as to the how real the situation actually was. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I've been cracking up here at the idea of a Temu Jamal Khashoggi incident. I'm so sorry. Well, I mean, my experience was much more pleasant. We were in a house. There had been something built out in the back. There was a scene where I'm filmed in bed, and it took you guys so long to get up the camera that I fell asleep. I had a solid 10 minutes kick in there. I did also mention that, given the lighting, that if you started playing soft jazz, I was out like a shot. Yeah, I did.
Yeah. The sleepiness is partially due to the fact that we made Laurence sit for about 36 hours worth of interviews, so that's probably why.
Something like that. Yeah, I was allowed.
Yeah.
I will say that I now know more about the process of filming B-roll than I ever thought that I would when I started like tinkering around with Ethereum. I'm pretty sure I put grooves in the floor of that window, pacing back and forth on my phone.
Oh, Jordan's on the other end of this live stream smiling as he says there's never enough B-roll, as I learned in Korea and Singapore.
Well, I mean, that'll come out soon enough. And it turns out it is entirely possible to say the same thing 7 times in slightly different ways.
Learn that the hard way.
Need the options in the edit.
Man, I hate you people. I hate you filmmakers.
So I'm kind of curious, as we talk back about the core like motifs of the film, obviously hacking, specifically within DeFi. One of the things you said, Laurence, was very eerily it's like the tune of Andreas Antonopoulos, and he referred to centralized exchanges. You referred to DeFi protocols, and that there's 2 types of DeFi protocols. One that hasn't been hacked and one that is to be hacked or something like that.
Yeah.
Like,
ones that have been hacked, ones that are going to be hacked. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious if you could speak to your experience as a builder, like in light of what happened at Index, why do you continue to build at Wildcat now?
I mean, the answer is job's not finished, right? And when I say job's not finished, I mean this crypto as a whole. Like, I don't think we've done our job yet in terms of like actually like co-opting the traditional finance space. It's also maybe more a indictment on myself that I couldn't see myself doing anything else. Like the EVM has a solid chokehold on me. I still find it endlessly fascinating. I love the way that Ethereum works. I love the way that people interact with each other on it. But so like, you know, I said that kind of as a glib offhand during the film itself. And I think we'd always, you know, we make light when things happen or we take them incredibly seriously. And there's that idea, which has actually now recently been broken in my mind. Like when I say like, oh, things that are going to be hacked, like Balancer was like such a huge blow to this idea of like, there's actually like properly Lindy tech. Like I think there's now there's Uniswap, there's some Yearn stuff, there's Aave, etc. It's kind of like oh no, these need to stay stable because the alternative is too depressing to think about. I think when we were filming something that didn't make it into the film, was I have this bit about like writing like names of protocols in the Death Note, and he gave me a black book, and I was like, like no, can we please not like even do this as a joke in the film? I think you have to be an optimist about this. You have to be an incredibly paranoid optimist. I think you can be both at the same time. In that, you know, when we were building Wildcat, like the test suite is absolutely abominable. It's like 700 tests, and it's secured on chain. Like you do what you can. I don't think you need to learn the lesson the first time in order to like become that paranoid. I certainly think it helps. I think the way that like we offshore things to audit companies that may not necessarily do the best job in some cases. I'm not saying that's the case with any of my experiences. Every auditor I worked with has been absolutely perfect and would recommend. But I think it's been mentioned in the film, right? It's terrifying to have something that sits on chain and then you can't wind back the clock. You don't often have circuit breakers. You don't have freezing things, but you're building that for crypto because you believe that that should be the case. You shouldn't, like, a lot of us got into this because we don't like the ideas of intermediaries being able to like kind of pull the choke chain. And you don't get to then be part of that as a contributor without accepting that that's how it's going to have to be.
Yeah, I just on that final, I think it's one of the really interesting things about everybody I met making this film is that there's pretty much nobody, including all the founders, developers, white hats, right deep in these cases. There's pretty much nobody that when you ask them like, "Oh, do you want this hacker to be thrown in jail?" that they're like really passionately like, "Yeah, that's what I want. I want them to be arrested and put in prison for hacking this protocol." I think at the very most you get a kind of like, quite grey area answer about how sure they, it's important for this not to be able to happen all the time and maybe they deserve to be punished. But like, really I came into this not wanting governments to be intervening in the space and especially law enforcement to be intervening in the space. So I think like, yeah, it's that is one of the really interesting paradoxes. I think like it's the impetus that gets people into this space a lot of the time. The fact that, like, as Laurence said, that there's no intermediaries and there's a sense of freedom, but then when a hack or an exploit happens, you see the other side of that, and that can often be very, very confusing for people at the heart of it, I think.
So, Laurence, I'm a bit curious because you were somebody who was working at a bank, middle office, as you stated throughout the podcast. Like, why would you leave a stable job when it seemed like I think you said you had a wife and a house in the film to work with Dylan Keller and just like the Wild West future of money?
So I've been tinkering around on Ethereum for like 2017, through 2019, just like the early stuff. I was like, doing some MEV searcher stuff. I was writing some kind of like gambling contracts because that's basically all that we had apart from Mooncats and early punks. I'd left that to move back to the UK like months before the pandemic started. Incidentally, I caught COVID right as DeFi summer started, so I missed all the really early stuff because I was laying on my mattress, absolutely convinced I was going to die. But at the time when I met Dylan, I was working as a programmer for an oil and gas company. It's just like monitoring stuff. It was like interesting work for me. I needed something to pay the bills. I just finished a master's in financial engineering, and you have to do like a dissertation at the time. And I had just done something about like optimizing for index funds, which is incredibly boring. Like no one in the history of anyone like has ever like read it again. I've never referenced it again. It was awful. It was just number crunching. At the time, a friend of mine, Blur, had referenced this new project that had been created. They were doing like token incentives for like participating. What is it? Oh, it's an index fund protocol. I was like, okay, right, I'll join the Discord. I start speaking to Dylan. Again, like he remains to this day one of my best friends. We just hit it off. I was like, okay, this now like it's like my most recent like academic research interest, something that's like I'm actually able to technically contribute to, and it gets me sticking in Ethereum, the thing that I was working through, like kind of as a side gig when I was in banking at the time. I probably only needed one of those as opposed to all three, but I think the way that I justified it to myself was I need to find out if this is like the thing I want to do with the rest of my life. The answer turned out to be yes, but I think you have to jump at some things at some point, right?
Well said. And I guess moving on to you, James, there's a really like quite funny inclusion in the film during an unfortunate time, obviously. But as the DAO is being drained, it looks like Wildcat says, "When do we panic?" And Shorbit says, "Panic 2 hours ago. Grab a beer now." Stylistically, was that something that you thought of, and why include in the film?
Yeah. So because that came from, so unfortunately, like quite a lot of the the DAO Slack, which we talk about, so there's 5,000 people on this Slack channel. A lot of that has been lost to time. So there was only actually a small. They kept it for a while, and I was trying to chase it down for ages. But all that's left is quite a kind of text file of maybe, I think it's just a few hours after the hack. But even then, there's like there's a lot of really good stuff in there of the way people. I think that, it speaks to the kind of the culture that we were talking to before, that it draws in, that it attracts a lot of the kind of irreverence that you associate with internet culture. That it just runs throughout that document. That even though people are watching often like thousands or tens of thousands of their own money disappearing in front of them, that like people weren't. Some people seemed very stressed, but a lot of people were. Reacting in just the way that you can see there, and kind of taking the mickey out of it. And I think even actually I saw on Twitter the other day one of those, because I've kind of seen all these usernames. I was like, wondering who the people are behind this. But one of the really fun things about the film has been on Twitter, seeing the people pop up like a screenshot and be like, "Oh, this is me. I made this comment 8 years ago while the DAO was getting hacked. This is so cool." Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was a super fun touch I noticed just like when watching the film. Really, really appreciated it. And so one of oh sorry, again, Laurence, all you.
It's just like the one that's burned into my mind is the line. I can't remember the name. I just know it starts with an S of someone going that, "Wait, were you guys outwitted by a child?" And I was like, I'll be walking around a supermarket. I'll be picking some stuff off the shelves, and that shit will just burn itself back into my brain. I'm just like, God damn it, God damn it.
That was definitely honorable mention in the flow of messages throughout the film itself. And so
sorry,
I guess
sorry.
all good.
No, I was just going to apologize to Laurence for putting that into the movie, but yeah, I'm glad.
It made for a good film, right? Like, that's like the next time I start getting the shell shock dog look while I'm standing in front of a bakery, you know what's happening.
And so I guess as the film kind of rounds out, and you touched on it a bit, James, the Mango Markets case being overturned, and we talk about this gray area between software and code being law as well as like the law being law. In both your minds, like where do you see the middle ground? And are there any things that, because there is this big gray area, that maybe worry you or things that you're curious about, like going forward?
Yeah, I can talk a bit because I think so just for the timeline to make sense, started kind of making this in kind of summer 2023. And then did most of the filming throughout the kind of year to 18 months after that. And the whole time while we were making that film, it seemed kind of settled amongst everybody that we would speak to in the research. Like, yeah, okay, so code is law is like a meme that has existed for a while, but it doesn't really hold any real world value at the moment or resonance. And everyone was using this Avi Eisenberg case as the kind of key example of this. They were like, so, you know, they arrested this guy shortly after I think the hack happens in the October. He's arrested in the December. And he was awaiting trial pretty much the whole time we were making the film. And everyone was saying, you know, they're going to find him guilty. He's going to be in prison for a long time for this. And that's going to be the kind of final nail in the coffin of this code is law thing. And that will set the precedent for all the other DeFi hackers. And then so we were like making the film with that in mind, making it with that. And then the news dropped. So he was initially found guilty, but then quite quickly after that, it seemed to be the case. Okay, well, then the defense are moving to try and get this overturned. And then it started to become clear, like, okay, there seems a reasonable chance that the judge is going to do this. And then finally it does happen. So the judge overturns I think the most serious conviction he actually overturns, as in, you know, reverses the decision. And the other two charges are vacated. So it's kind of as if it's never happened, if you like, if the trial is kind of just wiped out. So that's, and because of that, I really don't know, in terms of the answer of like, where does it stand now in terms of that balance, code is law, law is law. I don't know what to say about that because it isn't clear yet what the ramifications of that case falling apart is going to be. I mean, so to date, there's one DeFi hacker that is in prison for their crimes, who was a guy called Shakib Ahmed. I think I think it's Cream Finance and Nirvana. I think those are the two projects. But he pled guilty, so he never actually went to trial. So now the fact that the Eisenberg case collapsed, I mean, the government are appealing it, but as it stands, he's not going to be facing any significant prison time for that exploit. And the fact that Andean has been charged now, it's 9 months ago that he got charged, and still he hasn't been caught. I don't know where that leaves, because I mean, from my perspective, I would be surprised if the US authorities were as willing to be pursuing these kind of cases as they were 8 months ago when they just charged Andean and it looked like Avi was going to be put in prison for his crime. So for his alleged crimes. So I really don't know where it stands at the moment. To me, and until there's another and this Crypto Brothers trial, this MEV Brothers trial, falling apart whenever it was a couple of weeks ago, just adds to the community. I think the same thing with the Roman Storm trial, with the state failing to get a lot of its charges there over the line. It's just not clear how that's going to affect their appetite to pursue these kind of cases. And even if they do still carry on pursuing these cases, where there's ever going to be a consistent expectation that juries are going to be finding people guilty, even when the charges are pursued. So to me, it looked, in my mind, that's been the most fascinating part of making the film, is that argument that the code is law thing was just a meme. It actually now seems far more like, okay, well, actually, no, it does hold at least some substance as an actual legal defense now, because it's not like people are simply using that defense. It's kind of they're using elements of the ideas behind code is law in their defenses, but still it seems to hold a lot more water than people thought it might.
And as much as I wish, as you know, someone on the more technical side, that I'd have a more nuanced view, I think James has definitely gotten more into it. And I mean, I went to law school over this. like I got myself a whole ass law degree because of the time that I felt like, filing a civil case, talking to the regulators. And the only thing it did for me was like maybe slightly muddy my thinking about like, well, is this okay in some cases? Is it not? Like, where's the line? I think this is the case where like a little bit of knowledge poisons you because you start seeing the edges a little bit more clearly. Probably just because I can read cases a little bit better. I still maintain that, Majedovich's alleged crimes on Index were crimes. I certainly think he's behaved himself subsequently in a way that like certainly knows that he knows that that's the case. It's whether you can kind of get that through the system subsequently. Laws are social constructs, and it turns out when you're dealing with like the future of finance or bleeding edge stuff, the demons live at the edges. I don't know, and I wish I did. And if I did, I'd be a consultant and possibly the richest man in all of crypto.
Well said. Guys, I really want to thank you both for joining, James and Laurence, for this episode. That's all the time we have today, unfortunately. And as a reminder, our newsroom works tirelessly to get you accurate, informed crypto news. If you want to stay ahead, read the block. Thank you. See you next time.
Take care, everyone.
Yeah, thanks so much.